Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the third day of the Vienna Migration Conference 2020. My name is Schlaeger. I'm the moderator of this session, and I'm very happy to be with you for this focus session on community sponsorship, what potential for scaling up resettlement in Europe. Now, before we start the session, I would like to make a very short social media announcement. If you're active on Twitter, please do follow my dear colleague Martin Wagner at Mart Wagner, or engage with us and share your insights by using the hashtag ViennaMakeConf. Now, back to the topic, innovative ways to scale up resettlement, including through community settlement, humanitarian admission, as well as other complementary pathways where individuals, private sponsors, as well as also called private sponsorship, and communities are involved in welcoming and integrating people in need of protection into the community that has welcomed them. Now, what we'll be doing today is we will be looking at the potential of community sponsorship for strengthening and increasing protection pathways to Europe through looking at examples from Spain, as well as by taking a look at the potential for an EU approach to community sponsorship. And I'm delighted to be joined today to discuss this topic by two key experts on the topic. And I would like to begin by welcome Dr. Hana Jalloul Muro, who is the Secretary of State for Migration at the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration of the Government of Spain. She also worked previously as an assistant professor teaching political sciences and international relations. She's been an advisor to the delegate of the government to the Community of Madrid, has herself in 2019 been elected as a deputy to the Assembly of the Community of Madrid, and was then in 2020 appointed Secretary of State for Migration in the government by the government. Welcome to the session, Dr. Jalloul.
Thank you, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. And our second speaker is Mr. Giulio Di Blasi, who is the Europe Director for the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. Mr. Di Blasi also has significant experience working with the EU institutions, notably as a member of the Cabinet for the High Representative of Foreign Affairs responsible for migration and human rights, and also working at DG Home, where he was responsible for the hotspots in Italy and Greece. Mr. Di Blasi, also to you, welcome to the session. And now, before we start the discussion with our key speakers, I would like to show a very brief video that was kindly made available by the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, introducing how community sponsorship works in practice.
Community sponsorship is a groundbreaking approach to helping refugees find safety. This approach brings small groups of local citizens together to welcome newcomers into their communities.
This is another part of just being part of a global community, being aware of other people and ourselves. And the reciprocal relationship is really exciting.
Tens of thousands of people in a growing number of countries have taken part in community sponsorship programs to date. Others are working to launch similar programs. We are seeing amazing results, a positive impact in big cities and small towns.
A family will now be identified for us.
This is giving grassroots, ordinary people the responsibility for the entire journey that a family goes on from when they land at an airport through to them being completely resettled, integrated, happy.
People live in the area where the refugees are going to live as well, so they're part of that community.
We've discovered there are people in the community who have all sorts of skills to contribute.
Estamos todos para tratar de integrar a gente que no eligió salir de su país, tuvo que salir de su país. No es solo al refugiado, es a la sociedad que la hace crecer, la hace estar más unida.
One of the most important things in settlement is jobs. We actually need immigration from a workforce point of view. So my advice to business is to get involved either through providing mentor groups to help do the settlement or through hiring.
Having things brought down to a community level really personalizes the whole issue. It combines the numbers with the integration capacity, so it not only increases the possibility of more resettlement places, but also looks to the quality of those resettlement places.
Hoy le toca a este grupo desplazarse. Tal vez el día de mañana me tocará a mí y ojalá llegue el día en que nadie tenga que salir forzadamente de su país. Entonces creo que hemos ganado en sensibilidad y en humanidad.
Well, I do think this is really a wonderful video. It actually makes me want to join a community sponsorship initiative right away. But I also think that it shows from the video, but also when we look at the recommendations, that there's quite a lot of high expectations towards community sponsorship. It's supposed to strengthen communities. It's supposed to enhance integration, improve migration narratives, and eventually even increase admission places. So without much further ado, I would actually then, keeping this in mind, move to my first question to Dr. Jalloul. So a community sponsorship initiative is currently being implemented in the Basque Country. And you've also started a new pilot just now in Valencia. Could you highlight your role as Spanish State Secretary of the national government with a view to supporting this regional and community-led initiative? And could you share the lessons learned to date?
Hello, good morning. Thank you again for your introduction. For us, this is a super important initiative, community sponsorship, not only for us, but as has been mentioned, it's also reflected in the Pact of Migration presented by the Commission in a communication last month of September, where they highlight the importance of these kinds of initiatives. I would like to remark some things that has been mentioned also in the video, which I liked a lot, by the way, that we need to help and integrate. We use much more the term inclusion and integration of these people that they didn't want to get out of their countries, but they had to. And we work especially in itineraries of social labor inclusion. This is one of the main things I wanted to point out right now. The Secretary of Migration considers that community sponsorship initiatives, as one of developed in the Basque Country, as well as the most recent in the autonomous community of Valencia, has enormous potential to complement resettlement national programs, enhancing inclusion and social cohesion. Basque Pilot Initiative is a joint initiative between the Ministry of Inclusion, the Basque government, UNHCR, organizations, NGOs like Caritas or Ella Korea Foundation. Responsibility for refugee protection rests at the national level in Spain. This ministry is responsible of the reception of these families, and we work on this program for refugees and asylum in the framework of a program developed in the Basque Country. In this case, the ministry undertakes responsibility of the selection of the participants in first country of asylum, and in coordination with UNHCR, reviews resettlement plans, approval sponsors, and then the provision, of a safety net. In that sense, a strong government leadership along with the civil society engagement. This is very important because people go with a huge local network of support, is key for successful community sponsorship scheme. Our main role as a central government has to be coordinate these initiatives within the execution of the resettlement national programs to counsel different actors involved. Based on our experience in reception of asylum seekers, we can give much more support in order to develop these programs. We are keen, and we are going to extend these programs to the rest of the autonomous communities in Spain. And we supervise the different local integration programs in order to ensure that the requirements of the reception conditions directive is fulfilled by all projects. The main lesson learned is that community sponsorship of refugees is one of the best ways to foster integration of asylum seekers, accompanying refugees from the day they set foot on our territory, as well as a great catalyst for creating a more tolerant and inclusive society. Fostering human encounters and breaking communication barriers between people coming from so many different backgrounds is an added value to the communities. We can send you some of our videos that we have made of this pilot project, which really shows how inclusion is working very well through these programs. Myself, I want to pick up all these families to the airport, by the way, in order to give the main reception when they came to Spain. To date, we can say that the experience is very successful in many aspects. The link established between families and the local groups is very strong, and it has allowed for refugees to connect better for early stages with the community where they are welcomed. Local sponsorship groups have discovered different realities and become agents for change and narrative. Since from the first moment kids are already enrolled in the school, this is something very important that I would like to highlight. Refugees are better equipped to thrive in the new society and count on a very special support net if needed. It is also provided to be a very positive experience from the perspective of the joint work and coordination between all the stakeholders implied. We are also aware that some aspects will have to be reviewed when scaling the experience, like selection mechanisms, pre-departure information. We are still working on that, things to be better, but we can say till now that experience is very positive, and we would like also to engage the business sector, which is also a path to explore. Thank you. Sorry if I extended my answer.
No, it was very important to hear the full answer. And actually, I have a very brief question also to ask how you felt the cooperation was also with the local authorities, because it is very important, I imagine, for community sponsorship that the national government and local authorities also cooperate. And how do you see that cooperation with a view to community sponsorship? Has that also brought out future cooperation, and how are they included also in the decision-making process when it comes to the selection of the families to be sponsored?
Well, I have to say, for us, it's very important that autonomous communities, local autonomies, different, levels of local authorities, governmental authorities are involved. We are, national government, autonomous communities, and local government. It's very important. We need all to cooperate in this. We need to be all as one in order to understand that this project is very important for us. We have to take into consideration that sponsorship initiatives, community initiative must to be developed at local level. It's something that has been proven that they are doing in Canada and in many other countries, because local nets are at local level. This is the important thing to understand. For us, experience have been super positive, because it was the autonomous community of the Basque Country who also was willing to be part of this project. They have collaborated from all the areas of the government, local, autonomical, regional, let's say, which was very positive. And we have informed the autonomous community and local authorities about how the process goes. They have been with us and the International Organization of Migration, OIM, with ACNUR and the United Nations and all the stakeholders participating from the first moment and being informed. I have to say that it has been a very positive and a very important a very important initiative from the point of view of coordination. For example, I talked with the responsible of the autonomous community of Valencia in the month of August, and I told her, look, the state of alarm is finished. We need to resettle many families now in Spain that are coming from Syria, and I need your help in order to do that. And we made it super quickly. We just put everybody to work. We work with the local authorities, families, private sectors, schools, everybody to work in our initiative. We work, of course, with OIM and United Nations. They were aware in all the moment with the Secretary of State about the interviews. We gave courses. We prepare the families out there before they come in. We prepare the families once they came here. Everybody was so well informed, and quickly we host these people in our reception system for a few weeks, and then we send them straight forward to Valencia. And now we were talking these days with the families. We want to visit the families to Valencia, by the way. We went to present the programs. We talked to the families. We saw their houses. From the first day, the kids were in the school. I mean, it has been a huge effort by all wonderful. Wonderful, really wonderful. And it's working very well. It's not like the picture. I mean, we are really working, doing a very good job here, managing all this.
Thank you so much. I think that was really important also to hear how the cooperation is functioning. I would like to now move to my question to Mr. Di Blasi. Given that community sponsorship remains a prerogative of, as we heard, also national and regional and local governments and the citizenry, How can the EU and its specialized agency support and promote sponsorship beyond funding? And maybe you can also say a word on how would an EU approach to community sponsorship look like, since it's also being promoted as part of the recommendations to legal pathways.
Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Madam State Secretary. Good morning to the audience.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's really a pleasure to be here. And I must say, I mean, I couldn't have said it better. I think thanks really, Madam Jalloul. You really said everything I wanted to say. So I can move forward from that.
Thank you. I'm sure we think the same.
From the EU approach, I would really like to start from there. What is the most important thing in the pact is that it really signals, in my view, the willingness of the European Union to take ownership of community sponsorship. So community sponsorship has started in Canada 40 years ago. For several years, that was a Canadian purview and pursuit. And when it started to happen in Europe, there were a lot of skeptics saying, but this works only in Canada. This is only something for Canadians, as if there was something special around Canada for this. I think we are now entering into a completely new phase, a phase where Europe is saying community sponsorship is something we want to do. It's not the Canadian community sponsorship, it's the European community sponsorship, and actually is the every country community sponsorship, because as Madame Jalloul has already said, but this is my experience everywhere, every country will have a different program that is adapted and flexible to the governance and the reality of each single country. There are, however, some commonalities, which I think are going to be at the core of whatever EU model or approach is emerging. And those commonalities for me sit around two key topics. One is welfare. Europe has a very strong welfare system, which means that the role of the sponsors vis-a-vis the European welfare system is going to be different than the role of the sponsors in Australia or in Argentina or in North America. Welfare is a centerpiece, stays a centerpiece, and is crucial to community sponsorship in Europe. And the second one is the one that Madame Jalloul just mentioned, local authorities and cities. They have an incredible role to play in Europe. We are already working with dozens of cities around the continent. We just got Valencia to do a very important presentation at the Intercultural City Network recently, exactly around the role of cities and local authorities in community sponsorship. Because in Europe, cities are at the forefront of integration, and they need to be at the forefront of community sponsorship as well. Now, and I'll try to be super brief. What can the EU do beyond funding? I mean, of course, funding is very important, so we shouldn't be forgetting about it. But beyond that, there are three areas that I think are very important. The first one is actually Europe can advocate for sponsorship. It can advocate vis-a-vis its own member states, and that's very important. But it can also be a global advocate for community sponsorship. And I can tell you with the new US administration that has already indicated their willingness and intention to work on community sponsorship, the Canadian, of course, model that already exists, there is a very strong global momentum around community sponsorship, and Europe can be part of that global momentum. The second is to help setting the policy around community sponsorship in Europe. I mean, even though every scheme is flexible, I think, for instance, the fact that the Commission has indicated that sponsorship supports several pathways was incredibly important, because it really helps clarifying a concept that is being defined as we move in Europe. So there is an importance around that work. And then the third one is, of course, continuing to share best practices and connecting states. For instance, this is a role that the European Asylum Support Office is playing in order to really advance jointly on what works and what doesn't, because all of the projects right now in Europe are very young. So there is tons to learn, and there is tons to learn together.
Thank you so much, Mr. Di Blasi, also for, again, highlighting what community sponsorship could mean as in the EU, also in comparison to other community sponsorship schemes around the world. Now, moving to the second set of questions, I would like to, again, discuss scalability a bit more. And here again, the first question goes to the State Secretary. In community sponsorship schemes, there's many stakeholders involved, and you already also explained that, in often sponsoring few people. Is the Spanish government planning to scale up such schemes despite the substantial administrative efforts required? You mentioned already it does, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how it's planning to do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. By the way, Mr. De Blas, very interesting intervention also. I wanted to thank funding, very important, tons of information, many important best practices. We are working also already with EASO, European Agency for Asylum, which is very important. We are with young projects. We are young in this, but I think we are working very well. Thank you for your intervention. Answering to your question, I might say that this is definitely an aspect that we will have to look at when scaling the program. And we know from experiences in other countries that this is a especially challenging issue. For the moment, we have been partnering with organizations that have a strong community approach in the daily work, as Caritas and Jesuit organizations, but Spanish society proves to be exceptionally solidary. And there is a huge potential for widening the scope of stakeholders. We are confident that together with our partners, we will find adequate channels. And I like to say this, I like to highlight this. Why? Because we already, as you know, we are a first country and we have a huge migratory pressure. And in spite of all of this, our society is very generous and very open to this kind of programs. Spanish government is currently in collaboration with authorities of the Basque Country assessing the first pilot of community sponsorship that started in March 2019 with 5 Syrian families resettled from Jordan. This assessment will help the central government and other autonomous and local authorities, as well as other actors like NGOs, churches, and faith-based organizations and our public authorities to take advantage of the lessons learned and to use them as a good practices. In fact, some of the experiences that we have put in place in the Basque Country, we have used them in this new pilot in Valencia. We are also developing common standards, documents, and models to help future national projects of community sponsorship. The Spanish Secretary of Migration also wants to explore new alliance and initiative funding methods in close collaboration with civil society with the aim of establishing a community sponsorship model for the Spanish context. A model that will take into account the Spanish civil society solidarity and its compromise with refugees and UNHCR mandate and its aim to have a multi-annual framework. And I think I finished here my answer, but from here I would like to, to take and give my hand to what Mr. De Blas just said. I think we are aligned in these ideas, and we need these multi-annual conferences, and we begin, to move much more with this kind of initiatives, talking about funding, information, shared experience, best practices. You just said best practices, and I think this is the key question.
Thank you so much, State Secretary, also for really, outlining what the plans are for Spain with a view to community sponsorship. Now, directly turning to you, Mr. De Blas, regarding scalability, how do you foresee community sponsorship to be expanded on EU level to also increase the number of people benefiting from this measure?
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks again to Madame Jalloul. Of course, best practices are crucial, and we are really ready to work together with every state implementing sponsorship to share those best practices across the globe. It's super interesting what is emerging. There is so much innovation out there. On scalability, I think there are 3 dimensions of scalability at the moment in Europe. The first one is the obvious one, is country scalability. Other countries joining community sponsorship. I take that almost as an acquis. There is such an interest at the moment, and with the pact there is such a movement that, of course, there will be more countries joining community sponsorship, and this is absolutely fantastic. But I think the real challenge ahead of us is to scale programs within countries. So it's really how do we move from 500 people pilot to 5,000 national program, and I think Madame Jalloul just alluded to it very, very clearly. There are different dimensions. It's a very interesting work. It entails how do we mobilize more sponsors? How do we recruit more sponsors? How do we make sponsors sponsor more than one person? We just got a very interesting case in Ireland where a refugee who was sponsored to Ireland, actually the first one that came to Ireland, has now formed and joined a new sponsor group to sponsor a new refugee. So she herself has become a sponsor. And this shows the power of the ripple effect and the scalability potential if we are able to tap into that compassion and that willingness that exists. And then the third and probably most important element of scalability is the pathway scalability. If I think of the potential of students sponsoring students in education pathways, employers sponsoring refugees for jobs, family members sponsored by other family members to join them in a new country. The pathways really represent an incredible opportunity for scalability. There is innovation already happening in that space, and we are really looking forward to work with states to see how can we connect sponsorship and new pathways to increase the number of refugees, but also to increase the potential interest across our societies for new communities and new groups to join into sponsorship programs.
I actually would like to ask a follow-up question, especially because you mentioned also economic pathways. Actually, on the first day of the VMC, we followed a very, very interesting debate where Ivan Krastev mentioned that while EU countries appear to be more open to refugees, in reality, they're often more open to economic migrants. And the question would actually be, do you think that labor or economic pathways will become more prominent in Europe? And how can it then be avoided that currently more the most vulnerable are being resettled, that there's not a shift, as we've seen maybe also in Australia, towards resettling the more work-ready refugees?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are already experiences with economic pathways. I mean, in Canada, there was a project called ICMPD. And to give you an example that is even more interesting, we saw it in the video. Jim Estill, the person that spoke at the end of the video, he has sponsored 400 refugees to come to Canada and work within his organization, his company. And the groups, the community groups to welcome them were employees of the company itself. So that creates positive outcomes for the company from a corporate social responsibility perspective, positive outcomes for the company from an HR perspective because talent is being brought in, positive outcomes for the world refugee system because you have 400 more places for people to come. Complementary pathways are complementary by default. So the objective is not at all in any possible way to erode resettlement. That's why they are complementary. I don't see a major challenge there. Where I see a major challenge is instead, how can we make societies and countries also look at resettlement and people who are vulnerable, not just as vulnerable as a burden in a way, but actually as people that can bring along talents and skills. There are so many people that would fall under the vulnerable category that upon arrival would find job and are already finding jobs and contributing to society. So I think it's important in this distinction never to forget that actually skills and capacity are not opposite to vulnerability. They can go hand in hand. And it's very important that we build flexible systems that are allowed to cater for both.
Thank you so much for highlighting this really important point. Now we're already coming to the close of the session, but I would like to give both of you the opportunity to have one final statement. And if you could keep it to 1 minute, that would be great. I would start again with the State Secretary. And just the question for you, what is next in community sponsorships? What are the plans for 2021?
Can you hear me? You can hear me, can you? Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Blas, for your outstanding intervention. Well, as you may know, a second pilot experience has started recently in September in Valencia, and other regions have shown interest in getting the experience. We're going to begin, I think, with Navarra and other ones next year. 2021, we will work to expand our experiences to, I think, at least 2-3 regional governments. The reception and refugee support model is currently under review in Spain, and community sponsorship will definitely be part of the future support model. Spanish central government has started contacts with other autonomous communities and that have shown a lot of interest. Catalonia, Navarra. We plan to extend these programs at least to another 2 or 3, in addition to the evaluation of the Basque Country, which has been a very successful programs, we will expect financial and technical support to develop the program, opportunities to exchange and network with other countries that are also engaged in community sponsorship, as Mr. Blas said, and further development of an EU approach to community sponsorship as a protection tool in the framework of the Migration and Asylum Pact, which is already reflected there. We need to enhance this. So we will go in the same line as the European Union, all together in the same line. We plan to contribute to the Global Compact on refugees that aims at expanding resettlement and complementary pathways for protection, including here community sponsorship programs, as we really believe it's one of the best ways to enhance social inclusion of refugees. And we work social inclusion in several lines also here in Spain. The last thing I would like to say, as you know, we have developed this year a minimum scheme income. It's one of the main policies of inclusion of this ministry, because we are migration and social security and inclusion ministry here in Spain. So we are aligning all our policies, to inclusion, where community sponsorship is another of the main tools we are trying to deploy here in Spain. Thank you very much for this conference and for counting on our contribution, Spain's contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, State Secretary. And now my final question to Giulio, actually in keeping with the title of this year's VMC, what has COVID-19 changed with a view to community sponsorship? And what will the consequences be beyond the pandemic? Do you already have any lessons learned that you can share? And if you could keep it to a minute, that'd be great.
I'll be super short. I think what is very interesting is that, as many other things, COVID has actually accelerated trends. And while we were concerned at the start, it actually has accelerated also the potential for community sponsorship on 3 dimensions. First, we have been seeing so many micro communities emerging out of COVID. People that were going out for groceries for their neighbors, people that were going out to go buy pharmacy for their elderly care in their neighborhood, that are now turning to community sponsorship. Communities were born out of COVID, and this has an incredible potential for sponsorship itself. The second is narratives. I mean, there is, of course, a high risk related to COVID around narratives. It's more important than ever to have stories that relate to your community in a positive way around migrants and refugees. The third one, it's a very operational one, is health compliance. At a time where you need to quarantine, having sponsors hosted in individualized apartments with community wraparound support has an incredible potential. And it really provides for them to be able to land in a new country, and even if they need to quarantine, being supported by a group that will be providing for them day to day, and in particular will provide for them to feel at home despite being quarantined. So there is a lot of opportunity out there, I think, also out of COVID, and we really look forward to 2021 to exploit it all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, State Secretary. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
Mr. Di Blasi, I thought this was a very rich discussion. I think you mentioned so many important points. I actually thought before that I will highlight 2 main points. I think it's very difficult to now decide which the most relevant are. But what I would like to highlight, and I did think was very important, is on the one hand, State Secretary, you mentioned this solidarity aspect, the important that everyone needs to be involved and everybody wants to be involved. And this needing and wanting, I think, are really 2 parts that are really important to keep in mind. And you, Mr. Di Blasi, again, you both mentioned so many points, but I do think it's important to mention that if we look at vulnerable refugees, they're not only vulnerable, they bring with them a plethora of experience, of skills, of potential, and that is something that we should really build on. So thank you so much again for both of you. It was an honor moderating this session with both of you. For the audience, I hope you found the session as enjoyable as I did. And if you would like to know more about timely migration topics, please stay tuned for our upcoming sessions at 10 o'clock. We're looking at external shocks and border management. It will be moderated by my dear colleague, Borut Erzen. And with that, thank you so much. Stay safe and hope to see you soon.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.